The massive alien spacecraft materializes above New York City without warning. Its sudden appearance sends shockwaves through the bustling metropolis, transforming a typical day into an unprecedented crisis. Officer Brian Boyd, 32, stands rooted in Times Square, his NYPD uniform a stark contrast to the chaos erupting around him. Civilians scatter in all directions, their screams piercing the air as the colossal ship looms overhead. Brian's hand instinctively moves to his holster, but he knows his service weapon is useless against such advanced technology. His training kicks in, and he begins directing panicked citizens to safety, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of car horns and alarms. A deafening broadcast emanates from the ship, cutting through the din. The message repeats in multiple languages, each iteration increasing the tension gripping the city. People of Earth, we are the Orions. We come seeking human males to become our masters and protectors. Our survival depends on your acceptance. Brian's mind races, trying to process the implications of this bizarre proclamation. Before he can fully grasp the situation, a brilliant beam of light descends from the spacecraft, illuminating a section of the street mere yards from his position. As the light fades, a group of breathtakingly beautiful females materializes. Their appearance is both alien and familiar, humanoid in form, but with subtle differences that mark them as decidedly non-human. Their skin shimmers with an otherworldly iridescence, and their eyes hold a depth that seems to contain entire galaxies. One of the alien females, her movements fluid and graceful, approaches Brian directly. He tenses, unsure of how to respond to this unprecedented situation. To his shock, she kneels before him, her posture one of complete submission. "I am Yara," she says, her voice melodious yet tinged with desperation. "I offer myself as your pet, brave human. Our species faces extinction without your help. We need human DNA to survive." Brian's police instincts take over. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stand up slowly. You're under arrest for... He falters, realizing he has no idea what charges could possibly apply in this situation. Yara rises, but not in compliance. With a movement too quick for Brian's eyes to follow, she sidesteps his attempt to restrain her. Her superhuman agility leaves him grasping at empty air. Around them, similar scenes unfold as the other Orion females disperse, each approaching human males with their startling offers. The streets descend further into pandemonium as word spreads of the aliens' intentions. Brian gives chase, pursuing Yara through the crowded streets. She moves with inhuman grace, effortlessly weaving through the throngs of panicked New Yorkers. As they run, she calls back to him, her voice carrying despite the distance between them. "Please, you must listen. Our males have become infertile. A plague has ravaged our people. Without your help, we will cease to exist within a single generation." Her words only spur Brian to push harder. He's determined to apprehend her, to get to the bottom of this extraordinary situation. As they race through the city, more alien ships appear in the sky above, their massive forms casting shadows over different boroughs. The chase leads them to the relative open space of Central Park. Brian's lungs burn as he struggles to keep pace with Yara. He realizes that this is not an isolated incident, but a coordinated, global event. The fate of two species may hang in the balance, and he finds himself at the center of it all. As Yara slows, allowing Brian to close the gap, he's faced with an impossible choice. Does he trust this alien being and potentially save her species? Or does he remain loyal to his duty as a police officer and protector of Earth? The weight of the decision bears down on him as he reaches for Yara, unsure if he's about to arrest her or accept her offer. Brian's hand closed around Yara's arm, his grip firm but not rough. The alien skin felt smooth and warm beneath his fingers, pulsing with an otherworldly energy that sent a shiver down his spine. "You're coming with me," he said, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of panic that filled Central Park. "We need answers, and you're going to provide them." Yara nodded, her galaxial eyes fixed on Brian's face. "I understand. I will cooperate fully." As they made their way out of the park, the city around them descended further into chaos. The sky was now filled with alien ships, their massive forms casting long shadows over the streets of New York. People ran in all directions. some fleeing in terror while others approached the newly arrived Orions with a mix of curiosity and desire. Brian's radio crackled to life, the voice of Captain Mike Thorne cutting through the static. All units, this is a citywide emergency. Report to your precincts immediately. We're setting up command centers to coordinate our response. Copy that, Brian responded, his grip on Yara tightening instinctively. I'm bringing in one of the aliens for questioning. We'll be at the precinct soon. As they navigated the crowded streets, Brian found himself constantly intervening in conflicts that erupted around them. In one moment, he was pulling an overeager man away from an Orion female who looked overwhelmed by the attention. In the next, he was stepping between a group of terrified civilians and another alien, preventing what could have escalated into violence. Throughout it all, Yara remained by his side, her movements fluid and graceful, even in the midst of chaos. When a car, abandoned by its fleeing owner, began rolling downhill towards a group of panicked pedestrians, Yara moved with blinding speed. She placed herself in the vehicle's path and stopped it with her bare hands, the metal crumpling under her grip. Brian stared slack-jawed as Yara calmly walked back to him. How did you do that? Our physical capabilities far exceed those of humans, Yara explained, her tone matter-of-fact. It's one of the reasons we believe we can be of great benefit to your species, as you can be to ours. As they approached the precinct, Brian noticed a crowd gathering in a nearby square. At its center stood a man with a megaphone, his voice booming over the din of the city. People of Earth, we cannot allow these alien invaders to seduce and corrupt us, the man shouted. They claim to need our help, but how can we trust them? This is an invasion, plain and simple. Brian recognized the speaker as Rex Carter, a local rabble-rouser known for his extreme views. Carter's words were having an effect on the crowd, their faces twisting with anger and fear as they turned to glare at Yara. We need to move, Brian muttered, guiding Yara towards the precinct entrance. As they walked, he felt the weight of countless eyes upon them, a mix of curiosity, fear, and in some cases, unmistakable lust. Inside the precinct, they found a scene of controlled chaos. Officers rushed back and forth, phones rang incessantly, and the air was thick with tension. Captain Thorne stood in the center of it all, barking orders and coordinating with other precincts. Boyd, Thorne called out as he spotted Brian. Is this one of them? Brian nodded, guiding Yara forward. Yes, sir. Her name is Yara. She says she can explain their presence here. Thorne's eyes narrowed as he studied Yara. All right, alien. Start talking. Why are you really here? Before Yara could respond, a commotion at the precinct entrance drew their attention. A group of men in suits pushed their way inside, led by a woman in a lab coat. I'm Dr. Emily Chen, the woman announced, flashing a government ID. I need to speak with the alien immediately. We have a secure facility set up for genetic testing and interrogation. Brian felt Yara tense beside him. She leaned in close, her breath warm against his ear as she whispered, I have something that can help. A communication device. I can prove our intentions are peaceful. As Brian processed this information, the world outside the precinct erupted in a new wave of chaos. Reports flooded in of men who had accepted Orions as their pets, suddenly displaying incredible feats of strength and agility. The lines between human and alien were beginning to blur, and with it, the future of both species hung in the balance. Brian looked from Yara to Dr. Chen, then to Captain Thorne. In that moment, he realized that his next decision could shape the course of human history. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders as he prepared to make a choice that would ripple across the globe. Brian's mind raced as he weighed his options. The fate of two species hung in the balance, and he found himself at the center of it all. With a deep breath, he made his decision. Captain Thorne, Dr. Chen, Brian said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. I believe we need to hear Yara out. She says she has a communication device that can prove their peaceful intentions. Thorne's eyes narrowed, but he nodded curtly. All right, Boyd, but this better not be a trick. Yara reached into a hidden pocket in her iridescent garment and produced a small, crystalline object. As she held it up, it began to glow with an inner light. Suddenly, a holographic image appeared above the device, showing a regal Orion female whose presence commanded attention even through the projection. "Greetings, people of Earth. I am Zara, Supreme Leader of the Orions," the figure announced, her voice resonating with authority. "We request an immediate audience with your world leaders at your United Nations headquarters. The future of both our species depends on it." The precinct fell silent as the message ended. Dr. Chen was the first to speak. "We need to inform the president immediately." Within hours, Brian found himself escorting Yara to the United Nations building. The streets of New York were a surreal mix of chaos and wonder. Orion's ships still hovered overhead, but now humans and aliens alike moved through the city, some with purpose, others with obvious confusion. As they approached the UN headquarters, Brian noticed a large crowd gathering. At its center stood Rex Carter, his voice amplified by a megaphone. "Humans of Earth, we cannot allow these alien seductresses to corrupt our planet. This is an invasion, plain and simple." Brian felt Yara tense beside him. He placed a reassuring hand on her arm, surprised by the electric tingle that passed between them at the touch. Inside the building, they were ushered into a large conference room. World leaders from various nations sat around a massive table, their faces a mix of apprehension and curiosity. The U.S. president stood as Brian and Yara entered, followed by Dr. Chen and a team of scientists. "Let's begin," the president said, his voice grave. Zara, the Orion Supreme Leader, stepped forward. Her presence was even more commanding in person. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting," she began. "I will not mince words. Our species faces extinction. A plague has rendered our males infertile, and without human genetic material, we will cease to exist within 2 generations." Murmurs rippled through the room. The Chinese president leaned forward. "And what exactly do you propose?" "A symbiotic relationship," Zara replied. "In exchange for the genetic material we need to survive, we offer our advanced technology and the unique abilities of our females." Dr. Chen stepped up, her tablet in hand. "If I may, I've been analyzing Orion biology. Their females are indeed compatible with human males for reproduction. But there's more." She paused, her eyes scanning the room. "The resulting offspring would possess enhanced physical and mental capabilities. This could potentially advance human evolution by centuries." The room erupted in a mix of excited chatter and concerned protests. Brian watched as the world leaders debated amongst themselves, the fate of both species hanging on their words. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the building. Alarms blared as security personnel rushed into the room. "We have a breach," one of them shouted. "Hostile forces have entered the building." Brian's training kicked in. He moved to protect the delegates, positioning himself between them and the door. Yara was at his side in an instant, her body coiled and ready for action. The door burst open, and a group of armed extremists stormed in. "Death to the alien invaders!" one of them screamed, raising his weapon. What happened next was a blur of motion. Brian and Yara moved in perfect synchronization, as if they had fought side by side for years. He used his police training to disarm one attacker, while Yara's superhuman speed and strength allowed her to incapacitate 2 more before they could even fire a shot. The room became a battleground. Brian caught glimpses of world leaders being rushed to safety, of security personnel engaging the attackers. But his focus remained on the immediate threat before him. As he grappled with one of the extremists, Brian saw another taking aim at the U.S. president. Without thinking, he shouted a warning. Yara reacted instantly, leaping across the room to tackle the would-be assassin. The gun went off, the bullet missing its intended target, but finding another. The vice president crumpled to the ground. The fight was over in minutes, but the damage was done. The room was in shambles, and several delegates lay injured. The vice president's body was still, a pool of blood spreading beneath him. As the dust settled, Brian realized that cameras had captured the entire incident. Their actions, the seamless cooperation between human and Orion, had been broadcast to the world. In the aftermath, Brian found himself hailed as a hero. Reporters clamored for interviews, asking how it felt to work alongside an alien to save human lives. But all he could think about was Yara and the strange new world they now found themselves in. The president, his face ashen but resolute, approached Brian and Yara. "Your actions today have shown us the potential of human-Orion cooperation," he said. "We need to build on this. I'm announcing a pilot program for human-Orion partnerships, and I want you two to be the face of it. As word of the program spread, the world's reaction was mixed. Many humans, inspired by Brian's example, expressed interest in partnering with Orions. But Rex Carter's group grew louder, vowing to resist what they saw as an alien takeover. Dr. Chen approached them, her eyes bright with excitement. "We've made another breakthrough," she said. "Prolonged close contact between human males and Orion females triggers hormonal changes in both species. It enhances physical capabilities and strengthens emotional bonds." Brian looked at Yara, suddenly aware of the tingling sensation that seemed to constantly pass between them now. He flexed his hand, realizing that he felt stronger, more alive than ever before. As the first official human-Orion pair, Brian and Yara were subjected to a battery of tests and examinations. Scientists poked and prodded, monitored and measured. Through it all, their bond only grew stronger. But as more humans and Orions began to pair up, new challenges arose. Reports came in of unexpected side effects, of changes that went beyond what Dr. Chen had predicted. And in the shadows, Rex Carter's group continued to grow, their rhetoric becoming more violent by the day. Brian stood at the window of the medical facility, looking out at the city where Orion ships now floated peacefully alongside human aircraft. Yara joined him, her hand slipping into his. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Brian squeezed her hand, feeling that familiar tingle of energy between them. "I don't know," he admitted, "but whatever comes next, we'll face it together." "Together," Brian finished, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sleek Orion ships mingled with Earth's familiar skyline. As days turned into weeks, Brian and Yara found themselves at the center of an unprecedented scientific study. Dr. Chen's team had established a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to monitoring the physiological changes occurring in both species during their prolonged interactions. Brian stood in a stark white room, electrodes attached to his bare chest and temples. He took a deep breath, then began sprinting on the high-tech treadmill. As he ran, the machine's speed increased exponentially, far beyond what any normal human could endure. Yet Brian kept pace, his legs pumping with seemingly tireless energy. Dr. Chen watched from behind a glass partition, her eyes wide with amazement. "Incredible," she muttered, furiously taking notes on her tablet. "His endurance has increased by 300% since our first test 3 weeks ago." When the test concluded, Brian stepped off the treadmill, barely winded. He flexed his arms, marveling at the definition that had appeared in his muscles. "I feel different," he said, looking at his reflection in the observation window. "Stronger, faster, like I could run for days without stopping." Yara, who had been observing from the sidelines, approached him with a look of concern and fascination. "Your body is adapting to my presence," she explained, placing a hand on his arm. The now familiar tingle of energy passed between them, stronger than ever, just as mine is adapting to your world. Indeed, Yara had undergone her own transformations. Her skin had lost some of its ethereal glow, taking on a more human-like quality. She no longer needed to wear protective gear when venturing outside, her body having acclimated to Earth's atmosphere. But the changes weren't just physical. As they spent more time together, Brian noticed Yara's emotional responses becoming more nuanced, more human. She laughed more freely, her eyes sparkled with humor, and she even shed tears during a particularly moving film they watched together. Their success as a pair did not go unnoticed. News outlets clamored for interviews, and social media buzzed with discussions about the Human-Orion Partnership Program. Inspired by Brian and Yara's example, more humans volunteered to participate. As they left the testing facility one evening, they were greeted by a crowd of eager volunteers waiting outside. A young woman stepped forward, her eyes shining with excitement. "Detective Boyd! Yara, I just wanted to say thank you. You've inspired me to join the program. I can't wait to meet my Orion partner." Brian smiled, but before he could respond, a commotion erupted at the edge of the crowd. A group of protesters pushed their way forward, led by a familiar face. Rex Carter. "Traitors!" Carter shouted, his face contorted with rage. "You're selling out humanity to these alien invaders!" Brian instinctively moved to shield Yara, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to react faster than the security personnel. But Yara stepped around him, facing Carter directly. "We are not invaders," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We seek only cooperation and mutual benefit." Carter sneered, reaching into his jacket. Time seemed to slow as Brian's heightened senses registered the glint of metal. Without conscious thought, he lunged forward, tackling Carter to the ground just as a gunshot rang out. The crowd scattered in panic. Brian wrestled the weapon from Carter's grasp, subduing him with ease thanks to his newfound strength. As security officers rushed in to take Carter into custody, Brian turned to check on Yara. She stood unharmed, her expression a mix of concern and gratitude. But Brian's attention was drawn to something else, a faint shimmer in the air around her, dissipating quickly. Had she generated some kind of force field? Before he could ask, Dr. Chen hurried over, her face pale. "Are you both all right? We need to get you inside now. There's something you need to see." Back in the facility's main control room, Dr. Chen pulled up a series of satellite images on the main screen. They showed Orion ships descending from orbit, landing in various locations across the globe. "It's happening everywhere," Dr. Chen explained. "The demand for Orion partners has exceeded the available population in orbit. They're establishing temporary settlements to accommodate the growing number of partnerships." Brian and Yara exchanged glances, the weight of this development settling over them. The integration of their species was progressing faster than anyone had anticipated, and with it came new challenges and dangers. As if on cue, an urgent message flashed across the screen. Reports were coming in of attacks on the newly established Orion settlements. Grainy footage showed masked assailants firing weapons and setting fires. "It's Carter's group," Brian growled, his fists clenching at his sides. "They're escalating their attacks." Dr. Chen turned to them, her expression grave. "The president is calling an emergency meeting. He wants you both there. Brian, given your enhanced abilities and your experience as a detective, they're considering putting you in charge of a special task force to counter these extremist threats." Brian nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He looked at Yara, seeing the worry in her eyes. Their journey together had only just begun, and already the challenges they faced seemed insurmountable. As they prepared to leave for the meeting, Brian couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something monumental. The future of both their species hung in the balance, and the choices they made in the coming days would shape the course of history. With a deep breath, Brian took Yara's hand, feeling the familiar surge of energy between them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The true test of their partnership and of the entire human-Orion cooperation was about to begin. The true test of their partnership and of the entire human-Orion cooperation was about to unfold in ways they could never have imagined. As Brian and Yara immersed themselves in their new roles, they found themselves at the center of a growing controversy. The success of their partnership had sparked intense interest in the potential for human-Orion breeding. Scientists, policymakers, and the public alike debated the implications of such unions, with opinions ranging from enthusiasm to outright hostility. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of meetings and public appearances, Brian and Yara retreated to their shared apartment. As they sat on the couch, the weight of recent events hung heavy between them. "Yara," Brian began, his voice low and serious, "we need to talk about something." She turned to him, her luminescent eyes searching his face. "The breeding program," she said softly, not a question but a statement. Brian nodded, running a hand through his hair. "The pressure's mounting. They want us to conceive a child." Yara was silent for a moment, her gaze drifting to the window where the lights of the city twinkled against the night sky. "What do you think, Brian?" she asked finally. He took a deep breath, considering his words carefully. I think it should be our choice, not a political statement or a scientific experiment. Just us deciding to create a life together." A smile played at the corners of Yara's mouth. She reached out, taking his hand in hers. The familiar tingle of energy passed between them, stronger than ever. "I agree," she said softly. Their decision, meant to be private, became public knowledge within days. The media exploded with speculation and debate. Supporters hailed it as a brave step towards true integration, while detractors decried it as an abomination. As Brian and Yara navigated the storm of public opinion, troubling reports began to surface. Human-Orion partnerships were failing at an alarming rate, equipment malfunctions, inexplicable medical issues, and a rising tide of misinformation threatened to derail the entire program. Dr. Chen called Brian to her lab, her face grave as she showed him the latest data. "Something's not right," she said, pointing to a series of anomalous readings. "These failures, they're too consistent, too widespread to be natural." Brian's detective instincts kicked in. "You think someone's sabotaging the program?" Chen nodded grimly. "And I have a pretty good idea who's behind it." As Brian mobilized his task force to investigate, Yara prepared for her first prenatal examination. The medical bay hummed with nervous energy as technicians calibrated their equipment. Dr. Chen personally oversaw the procedure, her eyes widening as she studied the results. "This is unprecedented," she breathed, gesturing for Brian to look at the screen. The image showed a cluster of cells, unlike anything they had seen before. Even at this early stage, the genetic markers suggested abilities far beyond those of previous human-Orion hybrids. As word of the extraordinary pregnancy spread, the U.S. government saw an opportunity to shift public opinion. They arranged for Brian and Yara to participate in a controlled demonstration of their enhanced abilities. The event was held in a specially constructed arena, broadcast to billions around the world. Brian and Yara moved through a series of obstacles, their movements a blur of superhuman speed and grace. As a finale, they demonstrated their newly developed telepathic bond, completing complex tasks in perfect synchronization without uttering a word. The display captivated global audiences, social media exploding with awe and excitement. Support for human-Orion partnerships surged overnight, but not everyone was impressed. In a hidden compound on the outskirts of the city, Rex Carter watched the broadcast, his face contorted with rage. "This ends now," he snarled, turning to his assembled followers. "Prepare for attack." As night fell, Carter led a group of heavily armed extremists towards the facility where Brian and Yara were staying. Alarms blared as they breached the outer defenses. Brian sprang into action, his enhanced senses on high alert. "Yara, get to the safe room," he commanded, already moving to confront the intruders. The hallways became a battleground as Brian engaged Carter's forces. His superhuman speed and strength allowed him to disarm and incapacitate multiple attackers in seconds. Meanwhile, Yara led a group of civilians towards the safe room. As they ran, she felt a surge of energy unlike anything she had experienced before. Instinctively, she raised her hands, and a shimmering barrier of pure energy materialized around them. Carter, seeing his plan unraveling, pushed forward with a group of his most loyal followers. They cornered Brian in the main atrium, weapons trained on him from all sides. "It's over, traitor," Carter spat, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, a blinding flash of light filled the room. Yara stood in the doorway, her body radiating energy. With a gesture, she sent Carter and his men flying backwards, their weapons clattering to the ground. As sirens wailed in the distance, signaling the approach of reinforcements, Brian moved to Yara's side. They stood together, a united front against the threat that still loomed before them. Carter, battered but unbowed, glared at them with undisguised hatred. "This isn't over," he growled, before disappearing into the chaos of the ongoing battle. In the aftermath of the attack, as the full extent of Carter's infiltration came to light, Brian and Yara found themselves at the center of a rapidly changing world. Their unborn child, already extraordinary, represented a new chapter in human-Orion relations. As they stood together, watching the sun rise over the city, Brian squeezed Yara's hand. The future was uncertain, fraught with challenges and dangers. But in that moment, with the warmth of the morning light on their faces and the promise of new life growing within Yara, they felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. The world was changing rapidly around them, and they were at the epicenter of it all. As the days passed, Brian and Yara found themselves thrust into a whirlwind of medical examinations and scientific scrutiny. Dr. Chen's team conducted regular checkups on Yara, each revealing astonishing developments in their unborn child. "The fetal growth rate is unlike anything we've ever seen," Dr. Chen explained, her eyes wide with excitement as she pointed to the holographic display. Neural development is off the charts. This child, it's evolving faster than we can measure. Brian squeezed Yara's hand, a mix of pride and concern washing over him. Is it safe? For Yara and the baby? Dr. Chen's expression grew serious. We're monitoring closely. The accelerated development poses unique challenges. We're preparing for all possibilities, including the potential for a premature birth. As they left the medical bay, Brian noticed Yara's hand drift to her swollen belly, a faint glow emanating from beneath her fingers. Are you okay? He asked softly. Yara nodded, her luminescent eyes meeting his. I can feel the child's energy. It's intense, powerful. Their personal journey unfolded against a backdrop of global upheaval. Nations worldwide began incorporating Orion technology into their infrastructure at a breakneck pace. Clean energy plants sprouted across landscapes, while once congested cities now boasted silent, pollution-free transportation systems. But not all embraced this rapid change. Brian watched news reports of protests erupting in countries resistant to Orion influence. The world was splitting into two camps, those eager to advance with Orion aid and those determined to maintain their independence at all costs. Amidst this shifting geopolitical landscape, Brian and Yara found themselves summoned to a high-level meeting at the White House. The president, flanked by his top advisors, greeted them with a grim expression. We're establishing a specialized education program for hybrid children, he announced. Dr. Marcus Holloway will lead the initiative. We'd like you both to consult on the curriculum. Brian leaned forward, intrigued. What's the goal? To nurture their unique abilities while ensuring successful integration into society, Dr. Holloway explained, his eyes gleaming with enthusiasm. Your child will be among the first students. We need your insights to shape this program effectively. As they delved into the intricacies of hybrid education, reports began filtering in of a new social phenomenon, human Orion mating festivals. These large-scale events, celebrating interspecies unions, were gaining popularity across the globe. It's a powerful symbol of integration, Yara mused as they watched footage of one such festival. Thousands of couples danced beneath shimmering force fields, their joined hands glowing with shared energy. But even as acceptance grew, so did the shadow of opposition. Intelligence reports confirmed their worst fears. Rex Carter was active again. He had established a hidden compound in the Rocky Mountains, gathering followers and amassing weapons. We believe he's planning a major attack, the head of intelligence briefed them. Multiple targets, hybrid education centers, mating festival locations, key research facilities. Brian's eyes hardened. We need to stop him, now. The mission was high risk, but Brian knew he was the only one with the enhanced abilities to infiltrate Carter's compound. As he prepared for the operation, Yara's telepathic link provided constant guidance and support. Be careful, her voice echoed in his mind as he approached the hidden base. Something feels wrong. Brian moved silently through the rugged terrain, his heightened senses alert to every sound and movement. As he breached the compound's outer defenses, a chill ran down his spine. The facility was larger than they'd anticipated, with multiple subterranean levels. Descending into the heart of the complex, Brian stumbled upon a horrifying sight. In a cavernous laboratory, several Orion females were held captive, subjected to twisted experiments. Carter's scientists worked feverishly, attempting to create their own version of human Orion hybrids. Yara, Brian whispered through their link, we've got a major problem. Carter's kidnapped Orions. He's trying to breed his own hybrids. Before Yara could respond, alarms blared throughout the compound. Brian's presence had been detected. As he fought his way out, relaying critical intelligence to his team, he knew the situation had escalated beyond their worst nightmares. Back at headquarters, the news of Carter's experiments sent shockwaves through both human and Orion communities. Zara, the Orion Supreme Leader, appeared via hologram, her usually serene features contorted with rage. This is an act of war, she declared. We demand immediate action to rescue our people and bring this criminal to justice. As plans for a full-scale military operation took shape, with Brian's task force at the forefront, fate threw another curveball. Yara, her face contorted with pain, grabbed Brian's arm. "The baby," she gasped. "It's coming. Now." In the medical bay, Dr. Chen and her team scrambled to manage the complex delivery. Brian held Yara's hand, feeling pulses of energy surge between them as she struggled through premature labor. Hours passed in a blur of intensity. Finally, a piercing cry filled the room. Dr. Chen, her face a mixture of exhaustion and awe, held up a tiny glowing form. "It's a boy," she announced. As Brian cradled his son, named Zephyr, he marveled at the child's alert, intelligent eyes. Tiny sparks of energy danced across the newborn's skin. But the moment of joy was short-lived. Alarms blared throughout the facility. On the main screen, reports flooded in of simultaneous attacks on multiple human Orion installations. Carter had made his move. Brian looked down at Yara, still recovering from the intense birth, then at his newborn son, already displaying remarkable abilities. The weight of responsibility settled heavy on his shoulders. He had to protect his family, but the fate of human-Orion coexistence hung in the balance. With a heavy heart, Brian handed Zephyr back to Yara. "I have to go," he said softly. Yara nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Be safe," she whispered. As Brian strode out to mobilize the joint human-Orion task force, he knew they faced their greatest challenge yet. The coming battle would test not only their enhanced abilities, but the very future of their two species on Earth. Behind him, in the medical bay, baby Zephyr let out a cry. A nearby light fixture exploded in a shower of sparks, marking the beginning of a new era in human Orion evolution. Brian's heart raced as he sprinted down the corridor, alarms blaring in his ears. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, his newborn son, his recovering wife, and the fate of human-Orion relations all hung in the balance. He burst into the command center, where a team of human and Orion operatives were already mobilizing. "Status report," he barked, scanning the holographic displays that flickered to life around him. A grim-faced analyst stepped forward. "Sir, we're tracking simultaneous attacks on multiple human Orion facilities. Carter's forces are well-coordinated and heavily armed." Brian's mind raced, processing the information and formulating a plan. He turned to Dr. Marcus Holloway, who had rushed to join them. "Doctor, we need a safe haven for Zephyr and the other hybrid children. How quickly can we set something up?" Holloway's eyes lit up with perseverance. "With Orion Tech and our engineering teams, we could have a basic facility operational within 48 hours. I'll get started immediately." As Holloway hurried off, Brian focused on the task at hand. He tapped his communicator, connecting with the Orion command ship in orbit. "This is Brian. We need to form a joint task force immediately. Send your best operatives." Within hours, the command center was a hive of activity. Human soldiers worked alongside Orion warriors, their movements becoming more synchronized as they prepared for battle. Brian watched as Jason Chen, Dr. Emily Chen's brother, entered with his Orion partner Lyra. The pair moved with an eerie synchronicity, their bond evident in every gesture. "Jason, Lyra," Brian called out, "I want you two on point for medical support. Your healing abilities could make the difference out there." As the preparations continued, Brian received an unexpected alert. "Sir," a communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from inside Carter's compound." The main screen flickered to life, revealing the face of an Orion female. Her luminescent eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and purpose. "My name is Nara," she said, her voice steady despite the evident strain. "I've escaped from Carter's labs with critical information. We need extraction, and we can help you bring him down." Brian leaned forward, hope surging through him. "Nara, we're coming for you. Hold tight." With this new intelligence, the assault plan quickly took shape. Brian assembled an elite squad of human Orion pairs, each chosen for their unique abilities and seamless teamwork. As they boarded the stealth dropships, Brian felt a familiar presence in his mind. "Yara," he thought, the telepathic link between them humming with energy. "Be careful," her voice echoed in his thoughts. "Zephyr and I are safe. Focus on the mission." The dropships streaked through the night sky, their advanced Orion cloaking technology rendering them invisible to Carter's defenses. As they approached the compound hidden in the Rocky Mountains, Brian briefed his team one last time. Remember, our primary objectives are to rescue the captive Orions and apprehend Carter. We've got civilians in there, so watch your fire. Move fast, stay in contact, and trust your partners. The moment the dropships touched down, all hell broke loose. Carter's forces, alerted by some unknown means, poured out of hidden bunkers, the night air filled with the sound of energy weapons and the acrid smell of ozone. Brian moved with superhuman speed, disarming 3 guards before they could even raise their weapons. Beside him, Jason and Lyra worked in perfect tandem, Lyra's energy shield deflecting incoming fire, while Jason's touch healed any injuries their teammates sustained. As they pushed deeper into the compound, Brian's enhanced senses picked up the sound of desperate cries. He signaled to a small team to follow him, leaving the main force to continue the assault. They burst into a nightmarish laboratory, filled with glowing stasis pods. Inside each pod was an Orion, their bodies connected to a maze of wires and tubes. Brian's stomach churned at the sight, but he pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the task at hand. "Get them out," he ordered, moving to the nearest pod. As he worked to disconnect the Orion inside, he heard a commotion from the far end of the lab. A group of hybrids, their bodies pulsing with unstable energy, charged towards them. These were clearly the results of Carter's forced experiments. Their movements were erratic, their eyes wild with pain and confusion. "Non-lethal takedowns only," Brian shouted, dodging a blast of uncontrolled energy from one of the hybrids. "They're victims, not enemies." The fight was chaotic and dangerous, with the unstable hybrids lashing out with unpredictable bursts of power. Brian's team struggled to subdue them without causing harm, their training pushed to the limits. As the last hybrid was finally sedated, Brian's communicator crackled to life. "Sir," came the urgent voice of his second-in-command, "we've cornered Carter in the central control room, but he's threatening to activate some kind of self-destruct sequence." Brian's blood ran cold. He turned to Jason and Lyra. "Get these Orions to safety. I'm going after Carter." He raced through the compound, his enhanced speed allowing him to cover ground at an incredible pace. As he approached the control room, he could hear the sounds of a fierce struggle inside. Bursting through the door, Brian took in the scene in a fraction of a second. Carter stood at a central console, his hand hovering over a large red button. The room was filled with the unconscious bodies of both Carter's men and members of Brian's task force. "It's over, Carter," Brian said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Step away from the console." Carter's face twisted into a sneer. "You think you've won? I'll destroy everything before I let you take me." As Carter's hand descended towards the button, Brian felt a sudden surge through his telepathic link with Yara. In a flash of insight, he saw the console's inner workings, understanding exactly which circuits to disrupt. Moving faster than the human eye could follow, Brian crossed the room. His hand shot out, not towards Carter, but to a specific panel on the side of the console. With a sharp tug, he ripped out a cluster of wires. Carter's triumphant expression turned to shock as he slammed his hand down on the now useless button. Nothing happened. "No!" Carter howled, lunging at Brian in a final desperate attack. But Brian was ready. Using Carter's own momentum against him, he flipped the man over his shoulder, slamming him to the ground with enough force to knock him unconscious. As Brian secured Carter with energy cuffs, he tapped his communicator. "Control room secure. Carter is in custody. Repeat, Carter is in custody." A cheer erupted over the comm channel, the sound of relief and victory spreading through the compound. But Brian knew their work was just the beginning. As he looked down at Carter's unconscious form, he couldn't help but wonder what other surprises the man might have left for them to uncover. In the years that followed Carter's capture, the world underwent a profound transformation. Brian found himself at the forefront of a new era, his role evolving from soldier to diplomat, from protector to bridge builder. 5 years after that fateful day, Brian stood on a stage in Central Park, the warm summer breeze ruffling his hair. Beside him, Yara's presence was a comforting constant, her hand intertwined with his. Between them, their son Zephyr fidgeted, his 5-year-old energy barely held back. The park stretched out before them, a sea of faces, human, Orion, and hybrid, all gathered for a momentous occasion. Brian took a deep breath, his enhanced senses picking up the mix of excitement and anticipation in the air. "Today," he began, his voice carrying across the crowd, "we stand at the threshold of a new chapter in our shared history. Nova Harmonia isn't just a city, it's a testament to what we can achieve when we come together." As Brian spoke, his mind drifted back to the tumultuous years that led to this moment. The initial chaos following Carter's downfall, the painstaking process of building trust, the countless nights spent in negotiations. Yet through it all, a new world had emerged. Dr. Emily Chen stepped forward, her tablet displaying a holographic representation of her latest findings. "The data is clear," she announced, her voice filled with scarcely controlled excitement. "The human-Orion symbiosis has stabilized, resulting in a new subspecies with remarkable capabilities." As if on cue, Zephyr raised his hand, a small ball of energy forming above his palm. The crowd gasped in wonder, and Brian felt a surge of pride. His son, like many of the new generation, possessed abilities that once seemed like science fiction. The ceremony continued, each moment a celebration of how far they'd come. Brian watched as human-Orion couples participated in a public mating ritual, their energies intertwining in a dazzling display. What once sparked fear and controversy now elicited cheers and applause. Just as the ceremony seemed to be winding down, a ripple of excitement passed through the crowd. Brian looked up to see a familiar face materializing on the giant screen surrounding the park. "Greetings, citizens of Earth," Zara, the Orion Supreme Leader, said, her luminescent eyes shining with an intensity Brian hadn't seen in years. "I bring news from our homeworld." The crowd fell silent, hanging on every word. Brian felt Yara's hand tighten around his. "Our ancestral planet, long thought lost to us, shows signs of recovery," Zara continued. "We propose a joint mission, humans and Orions together, to explore and potentially resettle our former home." The announcement sent shockwaves through the gathering. Brian's mind raced with the implications, the possibilities. Without hesitation, he stepped forward. "Supreme Leader Zara," he said, his voice steady and clear, "on behalf of Earth, we accept. Yara and I volunteer to lead this expedition." The crowd erupted in cheers. Yara nodded, her eyes shining with excitement. Even young Zephyr seemed to sense the magnitude of the moment, standing a little straighter between his parents. In the weeks that followed, the world moved with a sense of shared purpose. The Haven facility, once a sanctuary, became the hub for mission preparations. Brian watched in awe as human and Orion scientists worked side by side, their combined knowledge pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Zephyr, despite his young age, became an integral part of the preparations. His innate understanding of Orion technology proved invaluable in adapting human spacecraft for the long journey ahead. As the day of the launch approached, Brian found himself standing in the command center of the newly christened Harmony, the flagship of their joint fleet. The ship hummed with energy, a perfect fusion of human ingenuity and Orion advanced technology. "Final systems check complete," a technician announced. "All ships report ready for launch." Brian nodded, taking in the diverse crew around him, humans, Orions, and hybrids, all working in perfect synchronicity. He felt Yara's presence in his mind, a warm reassurance. "Initiating launch sequence," Brian said, his hand hovering over the control panel. As the countdown began, he took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought them to this point. From that first encounter in the Nevada desert to this moment, on the cusp of an interstellar voyage, it had been a path filled with challenges, triumphs, and endless surprises. The ship shuddered as the engines roared to life. Through the viewport, Brian watched as the Earth fell away, its blue-green surface giving way to the star-studded expanse of space. Beside him, Zephyr pressed his small hand against the ship's control panel, his eyes wide with wonder. The ship seemed to respond to his touch, the energy systems pulsing in harmony with the young hybrid's unique abilities. As the Harmony broke free of Earth's atmosphere, leading a fleet of ships into the unknown, Brian exchanged a look with Yara. In her eyes, he saw the same mix of excitement and apprehension he felt. They were embarking on a journey unlike any humanity or the Orions had ever undertaken. The stars stretched out before them, a canvas of infinite possibilities. As Earth shrank to a distant blue dot behind them, Brian felt a sense of anticipation building. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Human, Orion, and hybrid, united in a common purpose. The harmony accelerated, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of two worlds. As they ventured into the cosmic unknown, Brian couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning of an even greater adventure.
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.